She helped a stranger with his groceries. The next day, he showed up at her work as her new millionaire CEO. Rain slapped against the pavement in thin, cold sheets as Claire pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Her blonde hair, hastily tied back, clung to her neck in damp strands. The sky over New York was a heavy, unforgiving gray, and puddles gathered at every curb, reflecting traffic lights like melting jewels. She'd just finished a grueling double shift at the diner. Her feet ached with a dull throb, and her stomach growled with a quiet vengeance. She ducked into the corner grocery store, her shoulders hunched, chasing the dry warmth inside. The bell above the door gave a weary, tired chime. Fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead. Claire blinked at the sudden brightness, wiping droplets from her cold cheeks. Her hands fumbled in her coat pocket, pulling out a single, crumpled $5 bill. It was just enough for a couple of instant noodle packs, maybe a can of soup if it was on sale. It wasn't much, but it would be warm. The store was busy, a long line, trailing behind the single open register. Claire stepped into it, her body relaxing just slightly as she browsed the clearance shelf near the front. Her fingers curled around a discounted pack of ramen, and she smiled at her tiny victory. Ahead of her in line stood a young man, probably in his mid to late 20s. He was tall but hunched slightly, his plain white t-shirt stained with fresh splashes of mud. His hair was disheveled and damp, sticking up in places like he had run through a rainstorm and lost a fight with it. In one hand he held a small basket containing milk, a loaf of bread, and a couple of apples. It was nothing indulgent, just enough to get by. When he reached the register, he patted his pockets, a flicker of panic entering his eyes. "Sir?" the cashier asked, her voice flat and unimpressed. He looked up, swallowing hard. I had my wallet. I think I must have dropped it. No money, no purchase," the cashier stated coldly, tapping her long nails against the counter. The man just blinked at her, speechless and defeated. Claire watched, her breath caught, somewhere between instinct and hesitation. She saw the flash of frustration in his eyes, but it wasn't entitlement or anger. It was the deep, weary exhaustion of someone who was just tired of being lost. She stepped forward. "Put it on. Mine," she said, her voice quiet, but steady. She didn't look at the man. She simply reached past him and handed her wrinkled bill to the cashier. The line behind them shifted with quiet murmurs. Someone behind her scoffed, but she didn't turn around. "You really don't have to," the man started, his voice low and startled. Claire finally looked up at him. His eyes were a clear, soft green, under the fluorescent lights, rimmed with disbelief. "Then don't thank me," she said with a small, tired smile. "Just do the same for someone else someday." The cashier rang up both purchases with a dramatic roll of her eyes. Claire took her noodles. The man hesitated, his basket now bagged, still standing there like he might explain something more. He began again, but Claire raised her eyebrows gently and interrupted, not unkindly. "It's just groceries, not a loan." "You're good." He looked at her for a long moment. Something about her calm, the quiet exhaustion in her own eyes stopped him from saying what he originally intended. He closed his mouth and simply nodded. As they exited the store together, the city opened back up into the wet, glowing blur of the evening. The drizzle had returned, soft and persistent. They stood awkwardly under the awning. Claire tucked her noodles into her canvas tote bag. The man shifted beside her, juggling the grocery bag. "Can I at least ask your name?" he said, finally. She tilted her head. "Claire," he smiled, a little unsure of himself. "I'm Alex." Their handshake never came. Instead, Claire stepped off the curb, into the mist, nodding toward the side street. "I'll walk you to the corner. It's safer that way." "Thanks," he said, falling into step beside her. Claire didn't ask where he lived. She didn't need to know. And he didn't explain why his shoes were soaked why his shirt was filthy or why someone like him looked so out of place, but not entirely lost. As they reached the intersection, Claire paused. "Do you want help looking for your wallet?" she asked, surprising even herself. Alex hesitated. "I don't want to bother you." She shrugged. "We've already shared groceries. Might as well go on a full stranger adventure." He laughed, a light, real sound. Claire smiled, the edges of her lips finally relaxing. They turned the corner, disappearing into the night. Behind them, the grocery store. Light flickered once, then went back to buzzing quietly, unaware that something significant had just begun. Under umbrellas, behind a rain-smeared window, a girl gave more than money and a boy chose silence over his identity. Neither of them knew it yet, but this chance encounter under stormy skies was the first line of a story neither one would ever want to rewrite. The rain had lightened to a cold drizzle with mist curling along the edges of the sidewalks. They retraced his steps, the neon buzz of the corner store fading behind them. Claire's boots splashed through shallow puddles, her breath coming out in tiny white clouds. The street lights flickered as the two made their way down narrow alleys and along rows of parked cars. Trash bins lined the curb, their lids rattling slightly in the wind. They passed a diner, its windows fogged and golden. Alex glanced at her sideways. "You always help strangers?" Claire shrugged. "Only the ones with good intentions and bad luck." He smiled at that. At the next intersection, the light blinked a steady red. Claire looked both ways, but the street seemed quiet. She stepped forward just as a car, tires screeching, came barreling through the yellow light. "Claire!" In a heartbeat, Alex grabbed her wrist and yanked her backward. She stumbled, her feet slipping on the wet curb. She crashed into him, her palms landing flat against his chest as the bag of groceries hit the ground beside them. The car roared past with a blast of cold air and a blaring horn. Claire stood frozen for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled back slightly, her breath catching, then placed her hand over her chest and let out a shaky, nervous laugh. "Okay, that was close." Alex looked down at them, his hand still gently holding her arms. "You all right?" Claire nodded, her cheeks flushed. "Yeah, just a little jumpy now." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, time seemed to stall. The sounds of the city blurred into the background. It was just them, standing on the edge of what could have been a disaster, but somehow felt like something else entirely. Claire cleared her throat and stepped away, brushing at her jacket. "Thanks for, not letting me die." Alex grinned. "Anytime?" They walked on in, silence until Claire spotted something beneath a park bench, mud-streaked and barely visible in the dim light. "Hey, is that?" She reached down, wiped away some dirt, and held up a soaked leather wallet. Alex blinked. "That's it." She didn't open it. She didn't even glance inside. She just handed it over like it was nothing more than a loaf of bread. He stared at her, astonished. "You didn't check it?" Claire tilted her head. "Wouldn't be much of a rescue if I did." There was something in her voice, steady, sincere, that hit him deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You're kind of rare," she shrugged. "I just believe people are more than what's in their pockets." He looked down at the wallet, then back at her, his lips curving into a genuine smile. "Let me buy you dinner." Or, well, whatever counts as dinner. From a food truck, Claire laughed. "You had me at carbs." They found a truck selling grilled cheese and tomato soup on the next block. The air smelled like melted butter and rich pepper. They sat on a bench beneath an awning, their paper cups steaming in their hands. "I haven't had grilled cheese in years," Claire said, taking a bite. "This feels like childhood." Alex smiled. "Oh, good childhood?" She nodded. "Mostly. My mom was a seamstress. She raised me alone. She made clothes out of nothing. Curtains, old sheets, even newspaper once when I needed a costume for a school play." "What?" Happened to her? She got sick. We didn't have insurance. She passed away when I was 17. Alex looked down at his soup, then at her again. I'm sorry. Claire smiled faintly. Me? Too. They sat there for a long while, eating in a comfortable silence, listening to the soft patter of rain on the metal awning above them. There were no titles, no expectations. Just soup, stories, and the quiet kind of connection that slips in when no one is trying to impress anyone. Alex studied her face when she wasn't looking. There was something in Claire's gaze that was resilient, unafraid, and utterly real. She didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. She didn't assume he was anyone special. And for the first time in a very long time, Alex felt like he could finally breathe. Under the glow of a flickering street lamp, Claire wiped her hands and stood up. Well, she said, you've officially paid me back. Not even close, he replied, softly. She smiled. Then surprised me, and with that, they started walking again. The days turned into a quiet rhythm of shared time. Claire and Alex, two people from opposite ends of the city's spectrum, at least by appearance, fell into a habit of meeting in the evenings after her shifts. Their places of refuge weren't candlelit restaurants or fancy cocktail bars, but benches in Central Park, food trucks near the library, or the stone steps outside, the old opera house where live music sometimes floated out on the summer air. They would sit with cheap takeout in paper boxes, laughing between bites. Alex often brought a sketchbook he never actually used, just to pretend. Claire brought ideas, sketches, and old dreams, wild inventions she scribbled on napkins. One night, sitting under a tree lit by a single overhead lamp, Claire handed him a doodle of a bird wearing a tiny crown. If I were a bird, she said, I'd be this one. Lost most days, but still trying to rule her little branch. Alex chuckled. I like her style. I don't need much, Claire confessed, tracing the lines with her fingertip. Just not to be invisible, you know. I want to walk into a room and have someone know I was there. Not because I'm loud, but because I mattered. Alex looked at her for a long moment. You matter, he said, softly. You always have. She smiled, her eyes dropping to the grass. Well, not everyone thinks so. He leaned back on his elbows, deciding to offer a piece of his own story. My family used to be comfortable, he offered. Big house, vacations in the south of France. Then things fell apart. Bad investments, lawsuits. We lost it all. That's when I learned who people really are. Claire nodded slowly, her empathy blooming. Is that why you dress? Like a struggling artist with holes in his sneakers? He grinned. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just really bad at laundry. They laughed together a little longer than necessary. And in that space, something gentle and real unfolded. Claire believed his story completely. Why wouldn't she? He was open and humble, never boastful, never pushing for anything. She had no idea the shoes he wore were worn because he chose them, not because he had to. And for Alex, it was the first time in years someone liked him without knowing his last name, his balance sheet, or the towering buildings bearing his company's logo. But not every evening was easy. One night, Claire showed up later than usual. Her shoulders sagged, her hair was loose and windblown, and her eyes were red. Alex sat up from the bench where he had been waiting. Claire, what happened? She dropped beside him, her voice trembling. Work. My manager said I was too slow, too soft with the customers. He humiliated me in front of everyone. Told me maybe waiting tables isn't for people who doodle dreams on their order pads. Alex's jaw tightened. He said that to you? She nodded, wiping at her cheek. I almost quit on the spot, but rent is due. And I already have 3 final notices taped to my fridge. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a napkin, one of the sketching ones, still blank. She took it with a shaky laugh. You're giving me a canvas? I'm giving you a place to breathe, he said gently. She looked up at him, and for the first time that evening their eyes locked. His were steady and calm, the way someone might look at a storm but choose to stay anyway. He reached out, his thumb brushing a tear away from her cheek. You see light in people, he said, his voice quiet but sure. Even when they're covered in mud. That's your gift. Claire swallowed hard. You think that's enough? I think it's more than enough, he whispered. They sat like that for a long time, under the city's darkening sky. Claire rested her head on his shoulder, not because it was romantic, but because it felt safe. And in that moment, both of them felt like maybe this strange, mismatched friendship was the most real thing either of them had. Claire landed a new, better job. Her first morning, she sat at her new desk on the 14th floor of Holston Media, a modest but ambitious creative agency in a downtown building. The office buzzed with morning energy, keyboard clicks, the whir of the coffee machine, and occasional laughter from clustered cubicles. This job in the creative department felt like her first real step forward. After years of scraping by, she finally had a chair with her name on it and a window, albeit one facing a brick wall. She threw herself into her work with quiet determination, staying late to sketch pitch ideas and storyboard concepts that no one else had time for. Her favorite was a quirky campaign idea for a new eco-friendly detergent, animated bottles with personalities cleaning not just clothes but bad moods too. It was weird. It was original. It was her. She shared it at the weekly concept meeting, nervous but hopeful. 2 days later, Sasha, a polished senior associate with killer heels and even colder eyes, presented the exact same idea to the creative director. Word for word, frame for frame. Claire sat frozen in her chair as Sasha breezily walked through the pitch like she had dreamt it up in her sleep. People nodded. The director smiled. Claire's name was never mentioned. After the meeting, Claire followed Sasha into the hallway. You used my idea, she said quietly, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Sasha turned, all saccharine sweetness. Oh, honey, you must be mistaken. We must have just had similar thoughts. It happens all the time, but it was in my email to the team, Claire insisted, her voice rising slightly. Sasha shrugged. And who's going to believe that? You're new. I've been here for 5 years. Claire reported it. HR listened politely but took no action. Later that afternoon, her manager called her into his office. We've received some concerns about your professionalism, he said flatly. Until we can investigate this, you're being placed on leave. Claire left the office with her badge clipped to a cardboard box of personal items, her hands trembling, and her throat tight with injustice. The next morning, she arrived at the building anyway. She couldn't explain why. It was some stubborn mix of rage, injustice, and disbelief. She stood outside the lobby, unsure of what to do next, when someone tapped her shoulder. Excuse me, receptionist said. Are you Claire? You're needed upstairs right now. Confused, Claire followed her. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. The doors opened onto the executive floor, a level she had never seen before. A line of employees stood by the glass conference room, watching someone inside. Claire stepped in and stopped, breathing. He stood at the head of the table, wearing a crisp navy suit, his hair neatly combed, confidence radiating from him like light-off steel. His eyes swept the room and landed directly on her. It was Alex, the man from the rain, in a muddy t-shirt who shared sandwiches and napkin sketches, now stood as the CEO of Holston Media. He smiled, a flicker of softness breaking through the polished facade. Claire's heart didn't just beat, it recoiled. A cold dread washed over her. She turned before he could speak, walked out past the stunned employees, past the elevator, and straight into the stairwell. Claire, Alex called after her, but she didn't look back. She made it 3 flights down before stopping, clutching the railing, her breath coming in, ragged gasps. He had lied, not just about his past, but about everything. And the worst part was, she had believed every single word. Claire kept her phone on silent. She stopped checking her email for days. She avoided the subway route that passed Holston Media. Her heart sank every time she saw someone in a navy suit. She even changed coffee shops, swapping their usual corner for one that held no memories. But Alex did not disappear. He left her voice messages. "Claire, please just talk to me," he sent. Handwritten notes tucked inside, sketch pads with flowers she never acknowledged. Her heart betrayed her each time. She saw his messy handwriting each time she reread the same 6 words. It was real to me. Every moment. Still, she stayed. Away. One afternoon, Claire sat alone in her tiny room, the window cracked, just enough to let in the fading sunlight. She pulled an old shoebox from under her bed, the one that held yellowing photographs and a ribbon that had once belonged to her mother. Her fingers brushed across a picture of a woman with gentle eyes sitting behind a sewing machine. Her mother had worked day and night to raise her alone. Her father, wealthy, married, and afraid, had walked away when Claire was just a toddler. She remembered her mother's tears when his family sent a final check in the mail with a curt note, "Do not contact us again." She remembered hearing her mother whisper to a neighbor, "They'll never accept someone like me. We come from different worlds." Claire had vowed never to put herself or anyone else through that kind of pain again. So when Alex stood there in his expensive suit, the CEO of the company that had unjustly fired her, he wasn't just a man who had lied. He became the embodiment of everything her mother had once feared. That evening, as rain streaked the windows, someone knocked. She hesitated, then opened the door. There he was, drenched. No umbrella, his dark hair dripping, rain down his forehead, his shirt soaked through. He didn't seem to care. He just looked at her, quiet and steady. "Why are you here?" her voice cracked. "I needed to see you one more time." She stepped back, slightly. "You lied to me." No," he nodded, his voice heavy with regret. "I never meant to hurt you." "Then why pretend? Why the t-shirt, the fake story about your family?" "Because for the first time in years, someone didn't see a title or a balance sheet. They just saw me." Claire looked away, the pain in her eyes burning, brighter than any accusation. Alex stepped closer, his own voice breaking. "I lied about who I was, Claire, but not about what I felt." Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. And then, through clenched teeth, Claire whispered, "You belong to a world that always hurts people like Rain tapped softly on the steps. "I know," he said. "And I wish I could rewrite the world for you, for us. But I can't. All I can do is be in it with you, honestly." She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and folded. It was the receipt from the night they met, still crumpled, the one from when she paid for his groceries. He had kept it all this time. "Do you remember what you said that night?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "I said, do the same for someone else someday." He gave a sad half smile. "I've been trying to. Starting with you." Claire held the small worn receipt in her hand. Something shifted inside her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a memory of something more fragile and real than her anger. 2 weeks had passed. Claire thought the silence would help her breathe. Instead, it filled her apartment like a thick fog, settling in the corners and hanging heavy in the air. She still went to the same coffee shop, still took the long route home. But every time she sat alone, the absence of his voice echoed louder than the city noise. She missed him. More than she had expected, more than she had wanted to. It wasn't just the way he looked at her or the way his voice softened when she was tired. It was the way he had made the mundane feel magical. The way he saw beauty in napkin, sketches, and street food, and her quiet resilience. One evening, Claire opened a drawer and found a folded napkin, one they had once doodled on together during a late-night coffee run. A crooked sun, a lopsided pizza, a tiny house drawn with shaky lines. She smiled, then blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. That night, a knock echoed through her hallway. A package lay at her doorstep. There was no return address, just her name written in careful block letters. She carried it inside with hesitation, sat on the floor, and opened the lid. Inside was a shoebox-sized treasure trove. Dozens of napkins, some yellowed, some wrinkled, all covered in the playful, messy, beautiful sketches they had drawn together. The pizza slice, the tiny house, cloud with her name in it, a butterfly with his. And at the very bottom lay a small, slightly curled photograph. It was them, seated on the curb by a food truck, biting into warm baguettes and laughing mid-bite. Someone must have taken it from a distance. Maybe the vendor, maybe a stranger. But the joy in their faces was unmistakable, candid, and so very real. Claire held the photo to her chest, breathing in slowly as though it could somehow steady her heart. There was a note tucked into the corner of the box, written in Alex's familiar hand. It read, "I didn't know what I was, looking for the day I met you. But you, your heart, your honesty, gave meaning to moments I never thought mattered. You taught me how to stop running from the quiet and start living in it, how to let laughter echo in empty rooms. You reminded me that kindness is not small, that love doesn't need chandeliers or suits to be real. I am still that guy in the white t-shirt, if you'll believe me. Still the man who wants to share bad coffee and good silence. Still the one who remembers every laugh, every napkin, every look you gave me like it was the first time anyone had truly seen me. If you can forgive the deception, I will spend every day proving that the truth of how I feel was always the most honest thing about me. I miss you, Alex." Claire read the letter twice, then a third time. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear or anger. Something warmer flickered in her chest. She held the napkins one by one, reliving every late-night snack, every rainy walk, every joke whispered across sidewalks. She heard his laugh again, saw the way he leaned forward when she spoke as if her words mattered more than anything else in the world. And she remembered what he said, outside her building in the rain. I lied about who I was, but not what I felt. That night, Claire did not cry. Instead, she laughed softly, like a secret she was finally letting herself in on. And she whispered into the stillness of her room, "Maybe I do believe in the guy in the white t-shirt after all." The office lobby looked different, now brighter, sharper, but Claire walked through it with steady steps. Her heels echoed against the polished floor like a quiet drumbeat of resolve. She passed the reception desk, the glass elevators, the modern art, installations meant to impress, but none of it mattered. Inside her, the noise was gone. No more doubt. No more replaying conversations. No more flinching at her own reflection, wondering if she was good enough. Today she was not here because of Alex. She was here for herself, to reclaim what was hers. To prove something, not to them, not even to him, but to the version of herself who once believed she didn't belong in rooms like this. Claire entered the creative department with calm, clipped steps. The room buzzed with idle chatter and keyboard clicks, but it fell quiet as she passed. Sasha sat at her desk, legs crossed, confidently flipping through a magazine like the world belonged to her. When their eyes met, Sasha's smug expression faltered for just a beat. It was small, but Claire caught it. She walked up without hesitation, set her bag down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the email archive. It was all there. The campaign concept, the annotated sketches, the time-stamped mood board she had agonized over for nights. A complete, undeniable record. I think you dropped something, Claire said, her voice cool and crisp as she turned her screen towards Sasha. Sasha paled slightly, her fingers tightening around the magazine. There was no witty comeback, no smug denial. Just stunned silence. Within the hour, Sasha was called into HR. Claire didn't stay to gloat. She didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need it because today she had stood tall and the truth had spoken louder than any whispers behind her back. Later that afternoon, while sorting through campaign notes at her desk, she heard footsteps, a quiet, familiar approach. "Claire," said a voice, low and respectful. Not corporate polished, but real. She looked up. There he was, Alex, in his tailored navy suit, crisp, white shirt, and polished shoes. But none of that mattered. What she saw were his eyes. Still honest, still holding the same softness she had first noticed. Outside that rainy supermarket. "I heard," he said. "You did it." Claire gave a small nod. She did not stand. She did not smile. "It had to be me," she replied. "I needed to stand on my own." "I know," Alex said, his voice a little quieter. "That's why I stayed away." She finally looked at him, really looked. And in his gaze there was no demand, no guilt, no grand plea to fix what had been broken. There was just hope. A quiet, steady hope. The office eventually emptied out. Lights dimmed, keyboards went. Silent and still, Claire stayed. As the sun began to set, painting streaks of amber across the floor-to-ceiling windows, she stood and walked to his office. Her fingers curled around the door frame for a moment. Then she stepped inside. Alex turned from the window, surprised, but he didn't speak. He just waited. Claire crossed the room slowly, her footsteps softer now, more intentional. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to feel his presence, close enough that her voice didn't have to be loud. "If I step into your world," she said, her voice steady and clear, "it won't be as a shadow behind you. I'll walk beside you. I'll earn my place, not just in your company, but in your life." Her voice trembled just slightly at the end, but it didn't break. Silence held them for a long moment, a moment where everything they had been and everything they could be hovered in the air between them. Then Alex took one step forward, like he was approaching something precious and rare. "I never wanted you behind me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I only ever wanted you with me." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Their arms found each other in slow motion, an embrace born not of passion but of knowing. Of finally understanding that what they had survived together wasn't a test, but a refining fire. Outside the office window, the city pulsed on, horns blaring, lights flickering, people moving fast. But inside that room, two people stood perfectly still. Not because they had reached the end of something, but because they had finally arrived at the beginning. The conference hall buzzed with soft conversation and the clinking of coffee cups as people filled the rows of seats. The backdrop behind the stage read, "The future of business, kindness, creativity, and connection." Claire stood backstage, her hands clasped together, breathing slowly. Her name was next on the speaker list, and the title of her talk was simple: "Kindness Means Business." It had been exactly 1 year since that stormy day at the grocery store. 1 year since a stranger in a muddy white t-shirt had entered her life and flipped her world gently, completely upside down. Now she stood here not as someone seeking a voice, but as someone trusted to speak. As the host called her name, applause rose politely from the crowd. Claire stepped out into the light. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly, and she wore a dark blue dress, simple, confident. Around her neck hung a tiny silver pendant in the shape of a paintbrush, a quiet nod to where she had started. She took the podium, smiled once, and then began to speak. "About a year ago, I helped a stranger buy groceries. I was exhausted, broke, and probably more stubborn than wise. But I saw someone struggling, and I thought, why not help if I can? Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. He was a mess. Mud on his shirt, confused, quiet. I thought he was having a worse day than I was, and I didn't want to wait for someone else to do the right thing. She paused. I told him not to thank me, that the only thing I hoped for was that someday he'd do the same for someone else. The room was quiet, now, listening intently. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly guessed, is that he wasn't just a stranger. He was the future CEO of the company where I'd one day lead a creative team. He was someone who had more power than I could ever have imagined. But that day, all I saw was someone human. Claire let the silence settle for a moment, then continued, her voice growing softer, more personal. I helped him with his groceries, but he helped me rewrite my life. He gave me the space to be heard, to rise when I had fallen. He saw value in me long before I saw it in myself. In the second row, Alex sat quietly, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit. His eyes never left her face. She turned her gaze briefly in his direction, just for a second, but the connection was unmistakable. Turns out, she said, a smile touching her lips, the heart is the real currency. Kindness isn't charity. It's legacy. It's how we build trust, loyalty, and vision. It's how we lead. A standing ovation followed. The applause was loud, but in Claire's ears, the only thing that mattered was the quiet pride shining in Alex's eyes. Later, after the conference ended, and the guests trickled out, Claire found Alex waiting for her near the glass doors, holding her coat. You are amazing, he said softly, helping her into it. She looked at him, her eyes shining. We were, she corrected, gently. Instead of a celebratory dinner at a five-star restaurant, Alex drove them to the very corner where they'd shared grilled cheese and soup a year ago. The same food truck was there, its lights a warm beacon in the cool evening. They sat on a familiar bench, not as a CEO and his star employee, but simply as Alex and Claire. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a single folded napkin. On it, he'd sketched a tiny paintbrush and a crown, side by side. He handed it to her. For our next story, he whispered. Claire smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile. I'd like that, she said, her voice full of a future she was no longer afraid to claim. And under the quiet hum of the city, they knew their greatest adventure had only just begun. Do you believe a single act of kindness can change a life, Claire? And Alex's journey shows us that the greatest connections are often found in the most unexpected places. Here at Soul Stirring Stories, we believe every person has a story worth telling, tales of hope, resilience, and the quiet magic of human connection. If you were moved by their story and believe in the power of second chances, help us share more like it. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Join our community and let's keep believing in the goodness of people one story at a time.